Next War Poland, second edition. I'm doing here at WW3 Con, doing a massive game with everything in the kitchen sink thrown in for the Next War system. We're using cyber warfare, we're using submarines, we are using most of the optional units, especially on the NATO side. I am playing the Russians. As you can see, they've massed on the border here. We've got Belarus on my side, and then we've got NATO in the Baltics. This is a strategic map. We're about to start the game. The U.S. player has randomly selected what aircraft are available and which ones are flown for turn one. They failed their Bornholm base and sea control roll, which is a bad start on the naval front for NATO. And otherwise, we're about ready to overrun some Western powers as the Russians. I don't feel good about it, but I am kind of captivated by the strategy here. So we're playing across two tables. That's the strategic display. We're also playing here on the operational map. As you can see, we've got some Russians and Belarusians in Belarus ready to go for some of those eastern Polish cities. Not a lot of defenses. We've got some Dutch in Vilnius up here and some Lithuanians, and then Kaliningrad forces there, and not very much actually on the map. So I'm very excited to get this going. We are playing with the Bornholm and Gotland sub-map, and like I said, submarines and naval stuff. So I'll probably do some look-ins at this as we play, but the Russians are ready to go. We're doing 10 missile strikes to open the hostilities. Well, here's the opening salvo of the turn one air combat phase. After the Russian special forces have done some pretty good damage to Polish air bases over there and destroyed actually a Patriot SAM battery, they are now scrambling basically every jet in Russia to face off against the Poles, and some U.S. Army, U.S. Air Force, and Swedish apparently are coming in, Swedish Air. All right, turn one, 24 hours later, of Next War Poland, second edition, done in the books. And it's been quite an interesting game. So the Russians have overrun Latvia. They're trying to secure Estonia, and then they've got advanced forces coming out of Belarus trying to take Lithuania, which has so far resisted the occupation. But I think it's only a matter of time there. The Allied and NATO naval units have exited the North Sea and come into the Baltic, which may or may not be a good thing. I'm going to have some cruise missile opportunities this turn to try and take out these marine forces that are on this amphibious landing group. But there's a lot of defenses in here, and the Russian Navy is 2 surface action groups, so it's not like they can do a lot. They're basically just trying to play cat and mouse games. Maybe try and control some of these inshore boxes. I might move one of them here to try and mine this coast to make movement harder into the northern Baltic. But I think the naval game, it really favors NATO and the U.S. Here. We had a really big turn as the Russians. We scored 48 victory points, pushing our total up quite a bit. There was a lot of aircraft shoot downs. The Russians actually lost more. We shot down some Canadians and some Hungarians, but the Russians lost more aircraft, and in fact did not win air superiority in the end, even though I threw so much of my air force at the NATO forces. Poland has suffered the most losses. A lot of that, though, collateral damage. If we move over here, from air-based cruise missile strikes. The first turn was characterized by a lot of missiles back and forth. A lot of ballistic missiles, a lot of cruise missiles being fired at targets, airfield installations, and whatnot. The U.S. has come on in a much bigger way here. We've got the 101st landing this turn, so turn 2 is going to be, they're going to be able to do a lot of mobile warfare because of their intrinsic helicopters. We've also got the 82nd Airborne up here. As you can see, they're moving in against these these Russians who are trying to clear this city. And this is where I think the Russians are going to get bogged down, is when they start to move into Poland proper. They've got to secure their supply lines. They've got to open this railroad. They're fighting their way onto the map here with an advanced force of Belarusians and Russian Airborne. And they've got to basically secure all of these urban areas as they connect to Kaliningrad. Otherwise, their supply situation is horrible. We've had some early success down here near Belarus, but the defense is thin. But it's like a long way to go, right? Every single one of these cities has to be cleared. It's going to be quite difficult, I think. Oh, there's a section of Belarus down here I didn't even see. I could have started some units down here. That's interesting. Well, we'll see how that goes. I do have the ability to move from that map to this map as we continue the campaign. Russians currently have the initiative still on top, but there's a lot more U.S. forces on the map now, and they have much better quality units compared to what the Russians have. So NATO hasn't yet responded with Article 5, but I think it's only a matter of time. It's only going to get easier as the turns go by, and they could start coming in as soon as next turn. Okay, third day of the game, third day of playing the game. the Russians still struggling to conquer Estonia, who have resisted probably more strongly than any of the other Baltic nations. Still in the process of trying to get the Russian army down here into Kaliningrad onto the operational map. Unfortunately, we've got the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Marines about to launch an amphibious invasion of Kaliningrad to try and nip the Russian threat in the bud. And I'll show you how that's going to affect the operational map. Pretty much naval dominance for NATO in the Baltic Sea right now. Pretty bold move to move some of these amphibious assault groups and surface action groups so close to the Russian naval defenses, but unfortunately they have not been able to hit so far, so I'm hoping for good detection rolls this turn. I think I'm going to try and get a little clever with the Russian Navy, even though they only have these 2 units. It's probably time to try and do something there. The Russians really suffering in the air conflict. NATO and U.S. forces their planes are just so good. They are good in every facet of the game, and the Russians are much more specialized. I've taken many losses, especially last turn, and I think this turn 3, is going to be pivotal in determining kind of who wins the game, and a big part of that's going to be who controls the skies, which is going to be NATO and the U.S. Let's go over here. So Russians have pushed into Lithuania, and with some success down here, but they've been really limited with their supply tether because of the slow movement on the roads thanks to refugees. This turn, it's going to be pushed out a little bit, and I'm going to try and make as much ground as I can. I've got to score points to keep the initiative, but I've also got to worry about the marine landing, which might happen somewhere over here near Kaliningrad, and that would destroy my supply line from the city. So trying to get some mobile supply units onto the map. He's been targeting them with special forces, the U.S. player has, so it's going to be, I think, again, very pivotal turn 3. The U.S. has come on with a bunch more HQs and more Army BCTs, so the punching power of the Poles and the U.S. together is going to be a lot stronger. NATO's still yet to send reinforcements. They're still dealing with the Article 5 response, but this turn, by the end of this turn, there's a 40% chance that we'll start to see some NATO units, and the NATO unit cups are full of goodies, so we'll see what happens there. All right, World War 3 Con, taking a little break from Next War Poland to show you what's going on here at the precursor to Game On. Just thought I'd do a little quick walk around. We've got less than 60 miles happening over here.
And in a dark wood.
And in a dark wood, connected. In a dark wood and less than 60 miles connected. Wow. NATO versus Warsaw Pact, that is the theme of this convention. We've got this massive game of Red Strike happening. The joke being that we could connect the Next War Poland maps and be fighting over the same territory.
Oh, yeah, I knew that. Got it.
They've been playing for a couple days. It's, I think, 5-on-5 or something like that.
Available SM should be 1 higher.
Yeah, 1 higher. 1 higher. So, I think I moved it wrong.
Lots of crazy stuff happening here. The designer is here. Eve.
No, that's just
We got some Air Armor.
one here. Any of that other road.
Air Armor Würzburg. Here's the the air display for Red Strike for just NATO.
I wanted to ask you a question. I always play the comic. I always play the comic.
Got some NATO Cold War Goes Hot over here. I think we're the only game taking place in the modern era. It's all 80s otherwise. We got some more NATO Cold War Goes Hot over here. Got some more Air and Armor being played there. Some Lock and Load, Heroes of the Red Star. Lock and Load Tactical. Got some more, got Blood and Fury 85 over here.
Oh, there we go. 4 hits.
Looks like a fun system. I really want to try it. Got Storming the Gap over here. So it's nice to see some Lock and Load stuff happening. Storming the Gap, World at War 85. This is, I think, just a setup table. There was a raucous game of Captain Sonar happening over here the other night. And we got Third World War set up.
Getting to the Rhine, almost. In fact, you crossed the Rhine by the time we were done.
So yeah, and then obviously Poland, where it's kind of mixed for both sides here in turn 3. So that's a little look around World War 3 Con. Well, here we are, the end of turn 3 of Next War Poland, and we are going to call it there. The Russians managed to squeak out another initiative turn on turn 3, which means going into turn 4 they would have had a lot of the tempo with them, and as you can see, they've made a lot of progress into Poland this turn, although Poland and the U.S. here have managed to push back the Belarusians here in the southeast outside of Warsaw. And then we had some daring U.S. moves up in Kaliningrad. The U.S. Marines did an amphibious assault outside the city with the Poles and the U.S. Army in support. actually a lot of good combat results for the Americans there. They were starting to push back and try and surround Kaliningrad, which would have been huge supply issues for the Russians. But my opponent decided that with the victory point spread being, I think at this point, almost 200 points, there was no way he was going to be able to pull it back. NATO still has not joined. They have gone, I think, what is that, 3 or 4 turns now where they have not been able to join with the die roll. And so none of the NATO units have even joined the fight yet. But I mean, he's doing a pretty good job of holding me there, but he felt that it was kind of futile at this point. So we're going to chalk this one up to a Russian victory. I mean, they have conquered all of Lithuania, have pushed down here into eastern Poland. They do have a little bit of an emergency there, but on the strategic map, it's a much different story. They finally did clear the Baltics in Estonia, so these forces would slowly be making their way down in this direction. But the naval situation here in the Baltics is a complete NATO control. As you can see, all of the Russian submarines pretty much are dead. There's one Russian surface group here and a Russian surface group here that actually should be strike 1 because it's repairing and port back in Russia. Some of the plans I had for future turns, possibly an airdrop into Gotland. I'm not quite sure if I would have been able to do that given the rules. I would have had to go check that, but I wanted to drop some air units here to try and take out this single Swedish defender. Maybe I would have got points per turn if I had been able to successfully do that. I was getting ready to do that. The NATO air situation, it continued to be overwhelming, and the Russians had no planes in air superiority. They couldn't run missions onto the map because of the dominating NATO air presence. Yeah, I think the big sort of point, the shifting point here was that the NATO player did not aggressively use their air as much as I thought. They were very conservative given the SAM ranges that the Russians were working with on this map, but I think he overestimated perhaps a little bit of how powerful the surface-to-air missiles were. But yeah, it was a good time. It took us 3 days basically to play 3 turns, and ended up with a Russian win.